Hi guys, welcome to SimLive. My name is Kiki and today I'll be creating 3 dresses for Daenerys, the sim that I've been working on creating custom content for. And in the previous video I created 2 hairstyles for her. In the video before that I created a dragon necklace for her. So today I thought I'd continue with it. This is actually the last video in this little mini series, and in this one I'll be creating 3 outfits for her. And the one I started with is the one in season 1, the dress that she's given by Illyrio, I think his name is, and before she meets Drogo, yeah, Drogo, and so there's the one that she's offered to him to marry, and this was actually the dress that I was most enthusiastic about because I had high hopes for it. I was going to create a see-through dress, which is the first time I've created a see-through item, and the other ones was just a bit, well, I was only setting out to create 2 dresses, and the second one was just a bit like, yeah, that'll look cool, but this is the one that I was like, yeah, let's do this. I really have high hopes for this one. And then yeah, I had to it's always the case that I end up doing a lot of troubleshooting and then things are not working, and then in the end I'm actually the least happy about this one, but it was still, actually thinking back on it, when I look at the dress now, I'm still like, well, you know what, maybe it didn't work out the way that I wanted it to, but it's still a nice looking dress, being that it is a little bit simple. Simple is not bad. A simple dress can sometimes be all you need, but yeah, basically this is a sort of cream see-through dress. It won't be see-through in The Sims now, even though that is what I was trying, and it's the one with the little pins. I think I showed a picture of it in the beginning anyway, so that's fine. So this is a combination between one of the like base game skirts, or did I use the dress? Well, either or. I think the bottom part of those is of that item is identical for the skirt or the long floor length dress. Is that what you call it? Maxi dress, I guess. And then the top from Jungle Adventure, which is my absolute favorite. I love that top. That is my favorite. Oh, actually I'm using 2 tops from Jungle Adventure for this. So I'm using the front, the v-neck for my favorite, and then the other top also from Jungle. Oh, they both have a v-neck. This is very complicated now. The one with the loose v-neck, that's my favorite. And then the other one I like as well. But yeah, it's a combination between the 2 meshes and the 2 textures. And because the Sims, or EA, or whatever you would call it, are so incredibly... Oh, look, this is one of the tests where I use the glass glass shader, glass sim glass, that's the name. And it looked nice. But I did not like how the bottom of the dress looked by the feet, and I couldn't find a way to make that look any nicer. I did try, I swear, for days, so I gave up and I was like, you know what, I'm gonna make it solid, forget about the see-through part. And what I'm creating right now is the 3-headed dragon pin, which is the sigil of her house, the 3-headed dragon, or the 3 dragons, 3-headed dragon, yeah, I think it's a 3-headed dragon, and she has 2 pins of that on the dress. By the collarbone, shoulders, arm twists. So yeah, I'm meshing that right now, and I am, dear God, trying to keep it as low poly as possible, because it's such a small detail, and you might be thinking, well, we're zoomed into it right now, it looks very blocky. It does, but in the game itself, if you would actually be playing the game, it would just be a speck on the dress. You wouldn't actually be able to see it up close that much. So I did try to keep it as low poly as possible, even though that even with these teeth I'm probably adding way too much detail into it. I really don't need to, but I just can't help myself. I'm like, but I want the teeth. I want them all to be separate. So yeah, and what I did for it as well is I'm using the, I don't know if I'm using it right now, I think I went back at one point, because I'm also trying to keep, because it's a small item, I don't want the UV map to be humongous. I wanted to take up just a tiny bit of space. So what I did was I think I've done it here, or I've done it here, is where I'm using the mirror modifier on the X and the Y axes, and so I only have to unwrap one side, and then with the mirror modifier it will just, you know, the other ones will just use that same UV map, and that saves a lot of space. You can also, you know, unwrap it afterwards and then manually lay them over each other, but if you want that to be very precise, you have to like individually lay every single vertex. It's just it does happen that I have to do that because then I forget to unwrap before using the mirror modifier. So here I'm just created the circle, and every time I look at it I'm like, oh, it just could have used another subdivision, and then I'm like, no, I'm doing it low poly, it's fine. So with this one as well, you can see me manually having to align all the vertices together, so I can just have one tiny bit of that ring overlay all of the UV map, and that will save space on the UV map because then I only have to texture that small tiny bit of UV layout on the texture space. So I just went very quickly back to the photo to check out for reference to see exactly where they were placed on the dress, and then afterwards I did create sleeves for it as well, but they are like the funny, beautiful but funny armpit sleeves. The sweat catchers. They don't actually go over the shoulder, but they just are in your armpits, and which turned out to be quite complicated in weight painting, so I had to take them off in the end because I'd rather have no sleeves than have them clipping through each other, or in on itself. Anyway, moving on to dress number 2. So I decided to create the one from the one that she wears when she gets to Qarth. And I like this one because it had the chest cage type of thing, which I think is supposed to represent armor, but then a very decorative one. I never finished my story, what I was talking about with the meshes, and I just realized it now. So basically what I've been doing with these outfits, I'm just combining meshes, existing meshes together, and because the meshes are so well have such an easy topology, and they're all exactly the same even though the outfit might be different, that it's actually really easy to just combine two of them, and in most cases you don't even have to weight paint them after, because if you don't move it ridiculously out of place then you can just keep it. Which is, I mean, in the beginning I was like weight painting them, weight transferring them, but then after a while I was just like, oh, let's just see if I don't see what happens in game, if there's any weird things, and there's not. It's actually, you know, it makes it really easy. They just kind of small adjustments and they just all slide together, which is amazing. I love it. The only thing is that this is a triangular mesh. I've forgotten the word for it again. I had to look it up the previous video. I'm not looking it up, can't be bothered. But a triangle mesh, and that you can't use loop cuts, and I've just become so dependent on using loop cuts for selecting things as well, just using the alt right click to get like a whole loop in. You can't use that with a triangular mesh. So it's a lot of just, you know, selecting vertice by vertice by vertice, which is, you know, can get a bit tedious sometimes. And then I just pulled the skirt down because it's different in different reference photos. So while I was creating this, the reference photos was just the dress would come to about the knees, and then I looked at pictures later on, and then it actually is a full-length skirt. So I'm not sure. I didn't actually go back to the episode to check. I just went with the reference pictures, and I have no idea what the back of the dress looks like. I couldn't find any reference pictures for that. I'm just assuming that it has a front flap and that it has a back flap as well. I'm going with that. And that was actually also relatively easy to create, because if you look at the side picture on the side and then on the mesh itself, I'm selecting it right now, is that it actually pretty much has that shape. So then I just inset faces, and, you know, Bob's your uncle. It was literally so easy. It was so easy that by the time that I finished this dress, God, what is wrong with my S's today? SH's is just like, but anyway, when I was finished with this dress, I was like, oh, actually, that was so easy, and I've already got the top for this. I'm going to create the other version of this, because there's another version of this where it's like with the pleated skirt. So you get a bonus dress. Because I only intended to make 2, but it was like, oh, this actually went relatively quick and it wasn't very hard, so let's just do it. Interesting fact, whilst I was texturing this, I looked up a lot of reference photos, and then I got to a website of the person who works on the films and does the embroidery. I don't know how to pronounce that word. Embroidery for the costumes, and oh my god, there were like close-up photos of it, and there's so much detail in these clothes. Like for instance, what it was saying for the Daenerys outfits is that a lot of embroidery on her clothes, her dresses, are references to dragon scales, and they get so incredibly elaborate, and like other characters have like bugs, which sounds disgusting, but like beautiful bugs, insects that are all embroidered. Yeah. So I'll leave a link to the website in the description, just because, you know, it's interesting. If you're interested in that sort of stuff, you might enjoy having a look at it. You can kind of see from the reference photo that I'm holding up there in Photoshop, there's a lot of detail on there. I'm not putting quite as much detail on my, you know, sim texture, but I do try to, you know, give it some flair. Give it some dragon flair. So at first, with this painting of this texture, I was doing what I usually do, which is just cloning and copying and pasting and adjusting it slightly, and then I was like, oh, I'll just paint it myself. The difference is that there's a slight texture to the Sims texture. Look, the texture is a word I use a lot, but it's like there's only one word for it. Like there's no other word that I can use for what I'm trying to describe. It means the same thing. So you have the texture, the image texture that the mesh will draw its information from, and then an object can have a texture to it, like a rough texture or a smooth texture or a shiny texture. And the Sims itself, like their textures, have sort of a grittiness to it. And I'm trying to recreate, because I painted it by hand afterwards, I'm trying to recreate that here with this. I'm using the burn and the opposite of that tool. Can't think of the word. And then with some textures to try and get that. It's not exactly the same, but then again, you will never like be that close to the item to notice. And here I am creating this scaly texture, and it's funny because I've never ever seen that texture in my life before, and now that I've been working on these dresses for like a couple of days and, you know, been looking at this texture, I'm seeing it everywhere. I was on the way to the tube today and I was like, oh, these chairs have that texture. What? And then I got into the tube, I was on the seats, and I was like, heck no, these seats fabric have that texture too. So I'm seeing the texture everywhere. What am I doing right now? Right now I am creating the specular map. So I'm going to, and that's why that's green, the scales on there, or the line work of the scales, are going to be shiny. And then the rest of it is going to be like the dress, the top part of the dress, that tunic type thing, is going to be a little bit shiny, not as much as the detail on it. And then the skirt, which is I think just a suede, so that's not shiny at all. And here what I was doing, I was creating some seams, because the dress has an incredible amount of detail on there, and some parts of that are just decorative seams. I'll remove them later actually, because along with the specular and that extra bit of detail in the normal map, it becomes a little bit painful for the eyes because there's a lot of happening. Here you can see it's just like, ooh, what's happening to my eyes? So I actually end up taking that off the normal map and just keep it smooth. But here you can see that the dragon scales are a bit more shiny than the tunic that they are overlaying. And now what I'm doing is I'm continuing on to the chest armor, the decorative chest armor, because I doubt that would ever in life do anything to protect you, considering that it has holes everywhere. And I did mention before with the first dress that I was creating that I wanted to use the SimGlass shader, and I didn't end up using it because for the dress I didn't think it looked quite right, especially in the bottom. It just I didn't like the look of it. So I will actually be using it for this one, and because I knew that I was going to use the Sim Glass shader for this one, I was like, oh, I'll just let it go and just make it a solid dress, and I'll be using the Sim Glass shader for this one. So the alternative to get that pattern would have been to mesh it or to overlay that texture over the dress texture, and I didn't want that. I wanted it to be two separate items, so in the end I end up using the glass shader for this one, so it can, I think it is a necklace, yes, so you won't be able to use this alongside the dragon, unfortunately, because they're both necklaces and Sims can't wear two. I've never actually tested that, but as far as I can think of, probably not. No, probably not, because they would use the same texture space on the texture map. So that's probably why you can't do that. And here I was just trying to get rid of the faces on the inside, and the only way I could think of that to do that easily was to select the whole outside and then inverse the selection, which ended up being probably even more trouble than just getting in there and trying to get the back. So we're moving on to the texture painting itself. So how do I explain what I'm doing? So the item is created of a sort of a skeleton of lines, and between that there's like the dragon scales again. So right now I'm just putting up the line work for that sort of skeleton in which the other scaly bits will lay. It's not really scales, but you know, there's sort of that pattern. And I'm actually using the texture size of my image is actually twice the size it should be, and even with that I'm getting a very blocky sort of effect when I'm using the blending options, because it's still too small for it to calculate that properly. But I couldn't really make it any bigger because it's already twice the size it technically should be, so I just had to make do. It wasn't exactly the effect I wanted, but I had to make do, basically. This texture is already overlaying, I think, the entire accessory portion. Oh, here we are in game, just testing it. It's nice and shiny. So moving on to dress number 3, which is basically just a slight adjustment of the dress number 2. I'm just replacing the skirt and keeping the blue part of the dress, the tunic bit, the flappy bit. And again, because the meshes are quite similar, I can pretty much just follow that and make some slight adjustments, seam it all back up together, or sew it all back up together, not literally, but you know, figuratively. And yeah, that's it. It's that easy. And now I was just a little bit lazy in combining these two UV maps together. I could have probably been a bit more precise at that, but at the time I was just like, oh, I get away with this. But I could have done more shadow work if I would have been more precise, but I wasn't. And here I'm actually using the shrink wrap modifier to attach the mesh that I've just parted from the main mesh back to the body, which is a neat little nifty trick to avoid any gaps, because otherwise I would have had to manually make sure that all those, after adjusting the mesh, that there were no gaps between the dress and the belt. And now I'm just creating the texture for the pleats. And the mesh of the dress doesn't actually have any pleats in it, so the pleated effect is purely created by the shadows in the texture and the normal map, and it looks pleated, so job well done. And this is actually the belt that you saw me create earlier, and that one is also getting the sim glass shader and this texture paint. And then I go back later on to do the chest cage one because I like the effect that I got on the belt more than I did for the chest cage one, because they end up looking relatively different. So I redo the texture. I do keep the first texture of it as well, so it will have two swatches. So if you want to combine the belt with the necklace, that they wouldn't look so like completely different, they would look quite similar. So that's why I added an extra texture swatch to the neck cage as well. So here I'm just giving it that sim glass shader, and here we are in CAS, the dress without the belt and the dress with the belt. So on we go to the showcase. I hope you've enjoyed the video and the creation of these 3 dresses and the project as a whole, and I hope you will join me next time. Have a lovely day, see you later, and bye bye!